In the beginning, I honestly thought I had won the emotional lottery. Ethan showed up in my life with that calm, attentive charm that makes you feel chosen, almost special. But even in those early moments, there were tiny cracks, little comments that felt off, pauses that didn't match his words, details that shifted when I asked twice. At the time, I brushed them aside, telling myself every perfect start in relationship stories long has its quirks. Still, something in my gut whispered that perfection shouldn't feel this scripted. I remember the first time that whisper got louder. We were having dinner, laughing, everything supposedly effortless, when he suddenly went quiet after I mentioned one of my friends. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone else, but I felt it, this strange discomfort that didn't belong in something so perfect. It's funny how, in toxic relationship stories, the danger rarely storms in. It trickles, disguised as normalcy. I kept replaying that moment later that night, wondering why someone so ideal had reactions that didn't match the man he claimed to be. Even now, looking back, I realized those early signs weren't random. They were pieces of a puzzle I wasn't ready to solve yet. Ethan crafted a version of himself so meticulously that any doubt I had felt like an overreaction. And yet, every time he smiled just a second too late or changed a detail in a story I clearly remembered, I felt that small internal jolt, like my intuition tugging at my sleeve. Little did I know, those tiny inconsistencies were the doorway to something much darker waiting ahead. I didn't notice how quickly the shift happened, how his tone softened only when it served him, and sharpened the moment my feelings didn't fit his script. The gaslighting started small, almost harmless, like him insisting I'd misheard something I was sure he'd said. Then came the emotional invalidation, wrapped in that calm, patronizing voice, "You're overthinking again." In relationship stories long, that's usually the moment where the woman starts doubting herself, and I wasn't any different. I felt myself shrinking, apologizing for emotions that were perfectly normal. The worst part was how convincing he could be. If I got upset, he'd twist the narrative until I ended up comforting him. Imagine crying because you feel unheard, only to be told you're creating problems, and suddenly you're the one reassuring the person who hurt you. That's the real poison in toxic relationship stories, the way they train you to distrust your own mind. I started questioning everything, my memory, my tone, even the way I breathed around him. It was like walking on emotional eggshells in my own home. And every time I tried to step back and analyze what was happening, he'd pull me in with some perfectly timed affection. A message, a compliment, a soft apology that sounded rehearsed. It kept me in this weird loop, confused, guilty, and strangely loyal to someone who kept tilting my reality. Deep down, something felt incredibly wrong, but I kept swallowing it, hoping things would settle. Instead, those distortions only grew sharper, and soon they became impossible to ignore. The excuses started piling up before I even realized they had a pattern. Work emergency, last-minute meeting, phone died, each one delivered with that polished calm he used to keep me off balance. But underneath every excuse, I felt this cold distance growing, like he was slowly stepping out of the relationship while pretending to step closer. In relationship stories long, this is where the confusion turns into quiet pain. And that's exactly how it felt, like a slow emotional leak no one else could see. I stopped confronting him, not because I was afraid of the fight, but because every confrontation became another opportunity for him to twist things. So I did what many women in toxic relationship stories end up doing without noticing. I went silent, not emotionally, strategically. I watched. I paid attention to the timing of his messages, the vague explanations, the tension in his voice. Instead of pushing for answers he'd only reshape, I let his actions speak for him. And trust me, They screamed louder than anything he ever admitted. There was this night that marked the shift inside me. He came home smelling like cologne that wasn't his, with the story so flimsy it practically dissolved in the air. I didn't argue. I didn't question. I just felt something inside me click into place, like my intuition stood up after months of being shoved down. From that moment, I decided to observe, not react. And as I pulled back, paying attention to the small things he thought I'd never notice, I started uncovering signs far more disturbing than his excuses. The moment I decided to look at his phone, not touch it, just observe, was the moment everything changed. I wasn't digging for drama. I was searching for clarity in a story that no longer made sense. Patterns emerged instantly. Apps that disappeared and reappeared, notification previews turned off, battery percentages that didn't match the time he claimed to be working. In relationship stories long, this kind of quiet investigation is often portrayed as paranoia, but deep down, I knew it was self-defense. I wasn't trying to trap him. I was trying to save myself from drowning in his lies.
One night, while he showered, I glanced at his lock screen and noticed a subtle shift, an icon that hadn't been there before, then vanished the next day. That's when I realized his secrecy wasn't accidental, it was curated. In many toxic relationship stories, the discovery comes as a dramatic explosion, but mine came as a whisper. Patterns repeating, details contradicting, timelines collapsing. My intuition, once dismissed, had become my most reliable compass. I started connecting dots he never imagined I'd see, simply because he thought I was too busy doubting myself. But the most powerful part wasn't the clues, it was my silence. He had no idea I was watching. And for the first time in months, the psychological game shifted. Instead of reacting to his narratives, I let the truth reveal itself piece by piece. I wasn't searching for proof to confront him anymore. I was searching for the truth to free myself. And as the pieces aligned, they pointed toward a reality far darker than anything I had imagined. A world he kept hidden behind carefully curated screens. The truth hit me in fragments. Screenshots, deleted icons, login attempts, traces that weren't fully erased. When I finally uncovered the hidden dating apps, it felt like the air left the room. Not because he was talking to other people, but because the entire version of him I'd been loving was a performance. In relationship stories long, people often say they had no idea, but I felt it in my bones even before I saw it. Still, nothing prepared me for discovering he wasn't just cheating. He was living a double life that made my reality feel staged. As I dug deeper, the shock became a physical sensation. Conversations with strangers, photos exchanged, meetups scheduled with men I never knew existed in his orbit. It wasn't about sexuality, it was about deception so layered it felt calculated. In many toxic relationship stories, the betrayal is linear, but this one spiraled into something that made me question every moment of trust I offered him. I remember staring at the screen, feeling this mix of nausea and clarity, like my heart and my mind had finally agreed on something for the first time in months. What hurt the most wasn't the apps themselves. It was realizing he had crafted an entire parallel identity with the same precision he used to manipulate my emotions. 2 separate worlds running at the same time, and I was the only one living in the dark. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I just sat there, realizing the man I loved never existed in the form he showed me. And somehow, that truth felt heavier than the betrayal itself, opening a door to the kind of decision no one prepares you for. What hurt the most wasn't the apps themselves. It was realizing he had crafted an entire parallel identity with the same precision he used to manipulate my emotions. 2 separate worlds running at the same time, and I was the only one living in the dark. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just sat there, realizing the man I loved never existed in the form he showed me. And somehow, that truth felt heavier than the betrayal itself, opening a door to the kind of decision no one prepares you for.
I knew confronting him directly would only hand him another chance to twist the narrative, so I did the opposite. I stayed quiet. Silence became my strategy, not my weakness. While he continued performing his perfect partner act, I gathered the truth like pieces of a puzzle only I could see. In relationship stories long, this is the moment where the woman stops playing defense and starts playing chess. And that's exactly how it felt. Every calm nod, every neutral response was a move meant to protect my sanity, not the relationship. One of the most surreal moments was sitting across from him at dinner, listening to him talk about his busy week while I already knew where he had been and who he had been meeting. The emotional distance I once feared became my shield. In many toxic relationship stories, people imagine revenge as loud and explosive, but mine was subtle, almost surgical. I began documenting things quietly, keeping my evidence untouched by emotion. It wasn't about hurting him, it was about reclaiming the power he had spent months stripping from me. When I finally exposed the truth to the one place he valued most, his professional circle, it wasn't out of spite, it was out of necessity. He had built his identity on control, on looking flawless, on being the trusted one. Revealing the truth there shattered the facade he used to manipulate everyone, including me. And the best part? He never saw it coming. My silence had become the one thing he could never distort, and for the first time, I felt the balance of power tilt back toward me, setting the stage for the decision that would ultimately free me. Watching his facade crumble was strangely quiet. There was no yelling, no dramatic showdown, just the slow unraveling of someone who had finally lost control of the narrative. He tried to maintain his composure, but I could see it, the panic behind his eyes, the confusion of realizing his usual tactics wouldn't work on me anymore. In relationship stories long, this is the moment where the psychological grip begins to break, and that's exactly how it felt, like a fog lifting after months of emotional suffocation. What surprised me most was how quickly his behavior shifted once he sensed I was no longer emotionally available. The man who once dismissed my feelings now tried to appear attentive, even remorseful, but it was all performance. I could recognize manipulation so clearly now, as if my mind had learned a new language. In many toxic relationship stories, the abuser doubles down when losing control, but he stumbled instead. Every excuse sounded weaker, every lie more fragile, every gesture more calculated than the last. And with each failed attempt at regaining control, I felt something inside me strengthen, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Alignment. My mind and intuition were finally speaking the same truth. I realized I didn't need more evidence, more explanations, or more apologies that were never real to begin with. The power he once held over me wasn't just fading, it was dissolving. And in that new clarity, I felt myself moving toward a decision that would change everything, even though I hadn't fully stepped into it yet. The moment I decided to stop digging was the moment I truly reclaimed myself. I had spent weeks uncovering every hidden corner of his double life, but suddenly I felt this deep clarity wash over me. I didn't need to know anything else. In relationship stories long, people often think closure comes from answers, but sometimes the real closure comes from choosing to walk away without them. My intuition had already told me the truth long before the evidence did, and trusting it felt like breathing again after holding my breath for months. He tried to pull me back with the same old tactics, sweet words, half apologies, moments of false vulnerability, but they no longer landed. It was like watching someone perform a magic trick when you already know exactly where the wires are. In many toxic relationship stories, the final break is dramatic, but mine was calm. I simply withdrew my energy, my attention, my willingness to participate in his illusions. And once I did, I could see how empty his manipulation was without my reactions to feed it. Leaving wasn't a single step, it was a quiet inner shift. I didn't slam doors or scream or demand explanations. I just chose myself. my peace, my sanity, my future. And surprisingly, it didn't hurt the way I thought it would. The pain had been in staying, not in leaving. Walking away wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of me finally listening to the voice he spent so long trying to silence. When I finally walked away, it felt like stepping out of a dark room I didn't realize I'd been trapped in. The silence that used to scare me became a relief, almost soothing, like my mind could finally breathe without being twisted or questioned. In relationship stories long, people talk about heartbreak after leaving, but what I felt was release, an emotional unbinding from someone who had rewired my reality. For the first time in months, my thoughts were mine again, clean and steady, not filtered through his manipulations. The days that followed weren't perfect, but they were honest. I woke up without that tightness in my chest, without checking my phone for inconsistencies, without rehearsing conversations in my head to protect myself. Healing didn't come as a dramatic breakthrough. It came as small, quiet victories. Cooking a meal without feeling anxious, laughing with a friend without second-guessing myself, remembering who I was before a man tried to convince me that my intuition was my enemy. That's the part toxic relationship stories often overlook, the beauty of coming back to yourself in pieces. And through that process, something powerful happened. I started trusting myself again. The same intuition he tried to break became my strongest guide. I realized I didn't need revenge, explanations, or closure from him. My closure was in choosing to rebuild my life with honesty, clarity, and self-respect. And as I stepped into that new space, I could feel a different story beginning, one written on my terms. And that quiet anticipation led me naturally toward everything that came next. Before you leave, take a moment to ask yourself one simple question. What part of your life have you been ignoring because someone convinced you to doubt your own intuition? If this story resonated with you even a little, don't let it end here. Start reclaiming your voice today. Set a boundary. Have that honest conversation with yourself, or simply decide you deserve better. And if you want more relationship stories long that expose the truth behind toxic relationship stories and help you recognize the patterns before they consume you, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Your healing isn't just possible. It starts the moment you choose to stay awake to your own truth.